After a very late start to their campaign, the proponents of Proposition CC lost on Tuesday. Supporters of the measure gave signs that the TABOR issue will be back on the ballot again in 2020. Meanwhile, Proposition DD passed by a whisker, with the decision still in doubt throughout Tuesday night. Patty, at one point around this table, you had your predictions for elections would be the kiss of death. You've now become our Nate Silver. I think you called this one right on the head. What did you think of the results from both, and do you think we'll see another TABOR issue in 2020?
I think we'll see another TABOR issue, and maybe we'll actually see a campaign for it, which we didn't see much of this year. It was interesting. I was hearing Casey Becker partly blame the failure of CC on the turnout, low turnout, which this was not a historically low turnout. And maybe more people would have turned out if there had been a compelling campaign for CC, which you just didn't see. You saw TV commercials with one woman worrying about fixing some roads, and that was it. There was not a really good argument. It didn't have a face the way previous attempts to push a debrucing has. You know, there was no Owens out there, you know, fast tracks push. There was no Polis. I mean, you barely saw him. He certainly was nowhere around during elections. So you need a campaign that's compelling, with some real faces from the state pushing it and saying why it's important, so you can counter the geniuses at the Independence Institute who are out front early and celebrating big. It wasn't a surprise CC went down. There were flawed language and a bad campaign. DD had a pretty good campaign. They had a lot of money because, of course, people are going to make a lot of money up in the mountains off this. So that it passed wasn't surprising. That it was as close as it was surprising.
David, there's kind of this odd juxtaposition in Colorado where a whole lot of smaller communities have, quote, debruced themselves over, let them keep the funds if it's something like for a firefighter district or a city or a particular county. But statewide, it does not tend to go well unless, like we had the whole the coalition around Ref C. What do you think is that distinction between a statewide ask and many of these smaller community and county asks?
Oh, credibility. So if the money will be spent on what they say it's going to be spent on. So for example, say that the Boulder Valley School District says, if we collect excess property taxes, can we just keep it? And the voters of Boulder said yes, because they had a guarantee that all that money would be spent on the Boulder Valley School District. The reason why the Independence Institute has been successful now, and this is now number 5 for us in participating in a coalition to help defeat massive statewide tax spending or debt increases, is the record, although even while being far outspent by the tax consumer side of this, the credibility. You know, the one major thing that did pass was Referendum C years ago, and Hank Brown was then the president of the University of Colorado, former Republican senator, and a great proponent of Referendum C, because he said, you know, CU needs more money, and so does the whole higher education system. And then he found that despite all the promises that were made in the campaign, the legislature just used creative accounting, and CU got practically nothing out of this supposed windfall that they were going to get. And that's why he was on the coalition and a spokesman against Referendum CC this time. And it was the same kind of skepticism as there was, if you looked at the ads with their phony, you know, conglomeration of newspaper articles, yes, we'll spend it on roads and schools and things like that, but there was nothing binding in there. And this time, I think the voters said, well, you know, this is Lucy swiping the football away from Charlie Brown, and we won't get fooled again. And if they maybe came back with something more genuinely binding, like they did on DD, where you know actually the little bit of money they're going to collect from it is actually going to be spent on water, they were more favorable to that.
Eric, you and I were both the opinion last week that perhaps the fact that the campaign started so late would be kind of a genius move. That fell flat pretty quickly, as many of our predictions made lately. But what did you think about the final turnout and the final results, and what that should give supporters as they make any plans for 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I think we speculated that maybe there was sort of some perverse genius behind not running a campaign. I think, you know, there was maybe there was perversion, but no, but no genius. This thing was sort of mishandled from the beginning. It was conceived late in the legislative session. The governor was lukewarm about it from the get-go. The governor spent the summer trying to cobble together an alternative, but could never get Democrats and Republicans to agree. It is not lost on me that on election night, the governor was literally about as far away from Colorado as you could be. He was on a trade mission in India on election night, left Casey Becker to deal with the press and issue the concessions statement and all the rest. And there was really no campaign. It didn't even start in a public way till early October. And that's not a campaign. In terms of what this means, it had none of the elements of Ref C that we're talking about, none of the elements of Ref C. In terms of what this means going forward, I know there are, people out there, and they were quoted within 24 hours after the election results of saying we're going bigger next year, we're going bolder, we're going to do a full TABOR repeal, maybe we'll do a graduated income tax, even though that just was voted down very recently. I think before they even talk to the general public, which is going to be a very tough sell, they have to put their allies together. They have to get the Jared Polises on board. They have to get Democratic legislative leadership on board. And I'm not sure there's much appetite for that. If you cannot pass something as tepid, and I regard Proposition CC as rather tepid, then to make the case that there's appetite for big, bold TABOR reform, I don't get it. I think there are a lot of people out there who think TABOR is the devil incarnate, and TABOR is problematic, but they have to get out of their bubble and go talk to some people for whom TABOR works rather well for them, and they're proud of it.
Josh, it is very true that you're going to get a whole different batch of voters in 2020 around a whole lot of other issues, notwithstanding the presidential race. So it is going to be an entirely new environment. But was there anything to take away from this current CC experience that would inform that even with a relatively different electorate in 2020?
I think Patty hit the nail on the head. CC had an uphill battle all along, and there for two reasons. The first is that it's addressing a bureaucratic problem that doesn't exactly pull at people's heartstrings. And then second, there was always going to be millions of dollars from Americans for Prosperity and other organizations that was going to get dumped in to maintain the status quo. I think if we learned anything from this, it's that in order to win, we have to have a compelling vision and a real narrative that draws people in. Patty had mentioned DD. It did that with the commercials. I think they were actually compelling. Now, it won narrowly, but it won. And at the end of the day, that's what we have to take forward. Without that compelling narrative, without a vision, we won't get where we need to get to.